All right, well, thank you for letting me take a time to do that. It's important as we navigate this world and the cultural events that are happening in this world that we have a biblical lens in which to understand this, which to look at it, and to remind ourselves of that. So we're going to kind of make a hard switch to the sermon today. We are in the last week of a series that we have been doing over the last couple of weeks called Rushed, where we are looking and really examining the pace at which we live our lives. There's an American pastor, his name is John Ortberg. Years ago, he wrote a book called The Life You Wish You Could Live, or something like that. And in that book, he wrote this quote that really, it kind of stops me every time I read it. The quote goes like this. It says that for most of us, the danger is not that we will renounce our faith. It is that we will become so distracted and rushed and preoccupied that we will settle for a mediocre version of it. That in that quote, it names something many of us feel, but rarely are we willing to say it out loud. That the greatest threat to our faith isn't that one day we will wake up and you go, you know what? I don't believe this anymore. I'm leaving it. I'm not going, right? Like that's not the greatest threat. For most of us, we will still believe, we will still show up, we will still try to follow Jesus. The real danger is much quieter than that. The danger is that our lives become so full, so fast, so fragmented, so disoriented that faith slowly gets pushed to the margins, where we live these rushed lives where everything becomes urgent, and when everything becomes urgent, those things that are most important typically only get the leftovers. And over time, we don't simply lose our faith. Sadly, we just lower our expectations of it. We settle for something that's thinner, something weaker, something less alive than what Jesus actually offers for us. Which is why this whole sermon series has really just has centered around this one simple truth, that a rushed soul is a crushed soul. And we feel that. Like, this series isn't about guilting you into something. It's not about adding something to our already overstuffed schedules. But a willingness to simply slow down, to see what the hurry and the rush actually is taking from us. It's about rediscovering the patterns and rhythms that Jesus himself lived, and daring to believe that our worth is more than just in the activity and the outcomes of our lives, but that our worth is actually truly tied to who we are becoming in Jesus. And so if you've been a part of this series, week one, Pastor Chris opened it up by helping us kind of really feel the rushness of our lives, and then create an experience where we experienced what it is to be in God's rest, even if just for a small moment. Then week two, we looked at this rhythm, this radical discipleship pattern of living a Sabbath life. Where 24 hours, once a week, we take a 24-hour break where we stop work, enjoy rest, practice delight, and ultimately worship God. Then last week, if you were here, week three, we looked at this counterintuitive pattern, this pattern that really in culture actually seems a little bit uncomfortable, but we see it all over the Bible, this rhythm of silence and solitude. This willingness to be by ourselves, only with God, and not to allow anything to enter into that space, this rhythm of silence and solitude. Today, we're going to bring it all home, and we are going to put all of this together with a very practical tool to help make this real, called a rule of life, all right? So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to look at a passage of Scripture, Deuteronomy chapter 6. So if you have your Bible or a Bible app, go ahead and turn there. That's where we're going to be. If you don't have a Bible or a Bible app, we're going to put everything on the screen so you can follow along with us, all right? Now, when it comes to Deuteronomy chapter 6, what we have are the most famous words in all of the Old Testament, if not the most famous words in all of the Bible. It is these words have been used by God's people in prayers. They have been memorized. They have been recited for thousands upon thousands of years. These words sit at the very heart of Israel's faith and identity, and they continue to shape our faith and our identity today. And within these famous words, God reveals a structure for everyday life and what it means to love him fully with our whole lives. And so Moses is writing, and here's what he writes in Deuteronomy chapter 6, starting in verse 4. These are going to be familiar to you. He says this, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your might. And these words that I command to you today shall be on your hearts. Now, in verses 4, 5, and 6 are the words that are famously known as the Shema. Now, Shema is just a Hebrew word that means to hear. It's the first words of the lines, "Hear, O Israel." But over time, the Shema became the title or way to refer to the most essential prayer in all of Judaism, found right here in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Now, if you know anything about Jewish culture, then you know that this prayer for the Jewish person, it is recited daily. It's part of their daily prayers. In fact, this is the climactic moment of Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. And when life is coming to an end, these are the words that are prayed over Jewish people as they pass from this life into the next. And if you've ever seen a Jewish person pray this prayer, the Shema, you'll know that they pray it with their hands over their eyes as they rock and say these words as a way of focusing on the words that they are saying. Now, when it comes to the Shema, this isn't just a Jewish thing, it's also a deeply Christian thing. You may remember the story when a couple of Pharisees came to Jesus and they're like, "Hey, Jesus, tell us, what is the greatest law in the Old Testament?" And Jesus' answer, he recites the Shema. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your minds. And maybe what's most striking about the Shema is that when it talks about loving God, it isn't described so much as a feeling, but more like a way of life. Look what Moses writes in verse 7. He says, "You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." I mean, look at what's being said here in this verse. That God tells his people to keep these words, his words, on their hearts. He says, "I want you to talk about them on your home and on your way to your kids' soccer practice. I want you to talk about them when you wake up in the morning and when you're going to bed at night." He says, "I want you to bind them on your hands." Scripturally speaking, when the scriptures talk about hands, what it's referring to is the representation of your actions and your work. Like, this is what you do, this is how you live. That's what hands represent. To bind God's commands on your hands means that his word is guiding your behavior, decisions, the way that you treat others. He says, "I want you to write them on your foreheads." That's not literal. Like, the frontlet is this spot right here between your eyes, and what it symbolizes is your thoughts, your values, your perspective, your opinions. In other words, faith isn't something that we do once a week. It's something that we live every single day of our lives. And God here in the Shema is inviting his people to build rhythms, habits, practices that will continually bring them back to him. And in these practices, I want you to notice something there in those verses 7 through 9. I want you to notice how ordinary the setting is. In your walking, in your going, in your sitting, in your lying down, in your getting up. It's like God is making an invitation to his people right there in the middle of everyday life, which is important for you and me today. Because most of our spiritual growth, most of the spiritual growth that we experience as people doesn't happen in the dramatic moments of our lives. That most of our spiritual growth actually happens in the quiet, repeated patterns of everyday living. That God knows, he knows this. That what we repeatedly attend to is what shapes us. What we repeatedly attend to is what forms us as humans. And this is where the ancient practice of rule of life comes in. Now, when you hear the word rule, I don't want you to think of law or like rigid, thing that you have to do. The word rule actually comes from the Latin word rugula, which is translated trellis. A trellis. How many of you are gardeners? Raise your hand. Any gardeners in the house? Yeah, a few of you. My wife is a big-time gardener. We have a big-time garden, all right? And any gardener knows that when it comes to this understanding of vegetables and fruits, anything that grows on a vine, a trellis is essential for that. That the trellis enables the plant to get off the ground, to grow upward, to be fruitful. It's the support structure that makes sure that the growth is healthy. And this is the imagery that the saints of old chose to use for our spiritual life. The saints of old said, hey, look, we need a regula of life. We need a trellis for life. We need a rule of life. It's not about restriction, but support. It's not meant to box you in, but to actually hold you up. See, a rule of life simply names the rhythms and the practices that help us stay in God in the middle of our real lives. It's a way of intentionally ordering our days so that we can live with God rather than constantly reacting to everything else. In a world where we feel rushed, and we do, right? I mean, we rush from one meeting to the next, from one class to the next, from one relationship to the next, from one conversation to the next conversation, from one activity to the next activity. Actually, last week, after this service, after the 10 o'clock service, somebody came to me in the lobby and they're like, Matt, I feel rushed in my rest. Like we just feel rushed all the time, don't we? And the truth is that we live in a world that teaches us to be perpetually behind. Always catching up, always responding, always moving to the next thing. And when your life is rushed, isn't this true? That God often gets reduced to whatever time and attention is left. And a rule of life is a subtle, gentle way to push against that pattern. It slows us down enough to become present with God again, to become present with others in our life, to become present with what's going on in our own souls. Listen, in a world that trains us to be rushed, a rule of life trains us to remain. And this is exactly what we see in Deuteronomy chapter 6. That God gives his people simple, repeatable patterns. Talk with your words. Remember them when you wake up. Remember them when you lie down. Remember them when you go to work. Remember them when you're coming home. Put them on the doorways of your life. These were not meant to overwhelm them. They were meant to anchor them. That God knew without intentional rhythms that his people would slowly drift away. They would slowly drift into distraction and forget who they were. I mean, this is why the context of this passage is so important. That when it comes to Deuteronomy chapter 5, that Deuteronomy, or chapter 6, Deuteronomy is the fifth book in what we call the Pentateuch or the Torah. It's the fifth book in the Pentateuch or the Torah. Now, it is given by God. It was written by Moses for the Hebrew people in order to teach them what it looks like to be God's chosen people in their promised land. And it's made up of a series of sermons. These sermons that are based on God's law, not given as some kind of abstract concept to like an already secular life, but rather as like the centering issue for them in terms of what it means to be a covenant people who know and love the Lord their God always. And so we get to Deuteronomy chapter 6, and it's in a form of exhortation. That's not really a word we use in English very much, but it means like, exhortation means like strong encouragement, or perhaps like urging something to do something really important. That's an exhortation. And Deuteronomy chapter 6 is written as an exhortation. And it's written with quite a bit of passion on the heels of the first 5 chapters of Deuteronomy, where Moses is reciting God's faithfulness, his love for the people, the law that he's given to the people, and he's reciting this for a generation of slave kids who have survived the wondrous wilderness, the wanderings in the wilderness. It was their parents and their grandparents, if you remember the Exodus story, it was their parents and their grandparents having been delivered in a miraculous way, right, from slavery in Egypt, who died in the wilderness because they doubted God. They died because they slandered God's character by questioning whether he would actually come through or not on his promises. And this entire generation dies. And they're known not as a generation that like kind of missed the point. Like this is an entire generation who dies because after seeing the power and the miraculous work of God, they're actually characterized as a rebellious generation. And these sermons in Deuteronomy are being given to their children as they're about to enter into the promised land for the first time in 400 years. And you would just think, reading Deuteronomy, like of all the generations who have ever walked on the earth, right? Like these kids, they get it. They watch their parents and their grandparents stumble time and time again. Like they understand what it means to walk with God. That they're the ones, in all the people, the history of the world, they're the ones who don't need to be reminded of what it looks like to walk with God. And yet here they are being exhorted, strongly exhorted by Moses. And for me, there's something that resonates deeply. That as we read throughout the scriptures, we find out that all throughout the scriptures, that God's people, they need to be reminded. Not because of unbelief, but because they are human. Memories fade. Life gets distracted. And if there's not intentional rhythms, even the redeemed, even the most faithful begin to drift. This is why Deuteronomy chapter 6 doesn't just say believe, it says remember. It gives practices, it builds rhythms. And this is where the rule of life can become such a gift for you and for me, where we actually choose ahead of time the practices that will keep us anchored to God when life gets loud, when life gets distracted, when memories fade, when we feel rushed. It's not about trying harder. It's about remembering who we are and arranging our lives in such a way that we don't forget. Now, admittedly, if you leave today and you Google rule of life, you will get hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of what a rule of life looks like. They're all over the place. In 2017, I read the book Emotionally Healthy Leader by Pete Scazzero, and in it, he gave a pretty easy framework for a rule of life. It's the one that I use. It's simple, it's basic, it's why I love it, all right? Now, when it comes to this rule of life, it's actually built around 4 primary categories of the Benedictine spiritual prayer life. Now, just a quick side note, Saint Benedict was a really, really cool guy, all right? He was a cool dude. He determined that his whole purpose in life was to create a model of monastic life, monk life, a model of monastic life that made it possible for ordinary people to follow every day. Like he wanted the ways of Jesus to be practical and sustainable, not heroic, not extreme, just livable. And what St. Benedict understood is that faith had to work on Sunday. It had to work on Sunday, but it also had to work on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, when we're actually out living our lives. And so his rule that he developed wasn't about escaping the world. It was how do we remain faithful in it? How do ordinary, regular people live faithful in it? And so the 4 categories that he built his rule of life around are prayer, work, rest, and relationships. And they weave together for a simple, repeatable rhythm. Each category is not just simply a list of things that we need to do, but also a way of receiving and giving God's love. It's why at the center of his prayer, of his rule of life, was God's love. If we were to diagram it, it would probably look something like this. That you would have God's love, receive and give in the middle, and then you'd have prayer, rest, relationships, work, and activity around it. Now, as you look at this, you can take a picture, or if you're interested in doing this, in our sermon guides, we actually have a printed copy of this. And so if you have the app or online, you can get this, your own copy, and you can fill it out. If you want an example of what one can look like, this one is mine. I've been doing this for 9 years, and so here's a little advice to you. Don't copy mine. Come up with your own, all right? That every year, at the beginning of the year, part of kind of like New Year's resolutions, I go through and I redo this. I add some things, I take some things off. And so you can see in prayer that one of the things there, the second thing says practice silence 11 minutes a day. For the last 6-8 months, I've been doing something called a daily office, and in it, there are 4 2-minute moments of silence and solitude that you practice throughout the day. In 2026, I'm trying to take that to 11 minutes. I'm terrible at silence and solitude, but I'm trying, all right? It's something that's on my list. Second thing, something that I added this year is the third one down, end work day with daily examine. A daily examine is simply 4 questions, and at the end of every work day, I ask these 4 questions of myself. Where did I notice God today? What challenged me? What frustrated me? What can I be grateful for? I sit and I search my soul, answering those 4 questions. I give them to God in a prayer. I close my computer, and my day is over. That's how I end every day. That's brand new this year. On rest, you might be looking, and if you look at the bottom, you're like, hey, you got working out 4 times a week as rest, cheater, right? Like what I found is actually the greatest thing for my mental health is my ability to work out. And so 4 to 5 times a week, I work out, I go to a gym, and it's a form of rest for me. Moving down to the bottom categories here, relationships. You can see time with my wife, with my kids, with my staff. I participate in a community group every week. Friends, I meet with Pastor Kim, the former pastor of this church, 2 times every month. It's something that I don't negotiate. We do it as a form of mentoring in my life. Work activities, you can see there's a dotted line there. Above the dotted line is the things that I'm responsible here at the church. The things below the bottom line are a few things that I'm responsible for at the house. I put all of this together, and through it, I'm able to receive God's love and give God's love in a rule of life. Now, every year when I do this, there's some things that come off. So a few years ago, I wanted to be better in my preaching. I wanted to be a better communicator. And so part of my rule of life under the work section was read 6 books on preaching. I did it. I crossed it off. And the next year, it didn't make the list. Now, if you've never done this before, don't tackle more than you can handle. That the best way to begin is to take some prep work and do an inventory of your life. Take time to work through a couple of questions. I want to give those questions to you. The first question before you write a rule of life is this, is what do you currently do that nurtures your spirit and fills you with delight? What do you currently do that just fills your soul? Consider people, consider activities, whatever it is that you love to do. Write everything down. Your list might include reading or gardening, walking your dog, hearing your kids laugh, playing with grandkids, being in nature, watching sports with your friends, cooking, painting, jumping out of an airplane. Whatever it is, right? Like you just write it down. Like I got a good friend here at this church, and his daughter's over at my house quite often. My daughter, his daughter are good friends. And I always ask, hey, how's your dad doing? And she goes, he's either watching somebody ride a bike, buying something for his bike, or riding his bike. Like it's what he loves, right? Like he writes it down. It is his delight. If you're here today and you go, hey, Matt, I don't know what that is. Here's my suggestion. Write some things down that you might enjoy spending time on, that you might want to explore to see if it nurtures your soul. The second question is this, is what are the things that you need to avoid? What are the things that you need to avoid because they deplete you or make it difficult for you to remain anchored in Jesus? This can include anything that negatively impacts your soul. Perhaps for you, it's a certain kind of movie. Maybe it's social media, going beyond your limits, toxic people, notifications on your phone, news media. Write down whatever it is comes to mind. What depletes you? And then the third question is this, is what challenges do you have in your life that are going to impact your rhythms in this season of life? In other words, what are the have-tos that you have to get to? If you are not retired, if you are not of retirement age, you have to go to work. That's a challenge, right? Like for some of you, perhaps your in-laws live down the street, and you got a standing dinner with them every week, right? Maybe you have aging parents and you're the caretaker. Maybe you're a single mom or a single dad. Maybe you're a parent of young kids. Listen, my rule of life looked a lot different when my kids were 8, 6, and 4 than now when they're 17, 15, and 13. And in 9 years, it'll probably look a lot different as my parents continue to age. Every season has its challenges. One of the greatest joys of my entire life has been raising my 3 kids and navigating that responsibility while refusing to give up on the spiritual rhythms of my life has been also one of my greatest challenges. That every season of life has a challenge. What are your challenges? What are the have-tos that you have going on? Write those down. Once you know what nurtures your spirit, once you know what depletes you, and what your challenges are, then you have a baseline for putting this all together in a rule of life. Listen, making the necessary changes to slow your life down for loving union with Jesus is a totally countercultural thing to do. Like, we don't live in a monastic community, right? Like we don't have shared schedules and built-in structures and bells telling us when to eat and when to rest and when to play and when to go to work. Like that doesn't exist for us. Like no one is organizing our days for us. No one is protecting our attention. And if anything, everything around us is actually competing for that attention and driving us in an opposite direction. And if you don't choose your rhythms intentionally, come on, the world will choose them for you. If you do not choose your rhythms intentionally, the world will gladly choose them for you. It's why this slowing down isn't accidental. It has to be intentional. It has to be a decision. It's a decision that requires some courage. It's a decision that requires clarity. It's a decision that will require you to say no to some really good things that maybe aren't all that life-giving to you. That a rule of life doesn't make us more spiritual than other people. It does not. It simply helps you become more faithful to the life that you're already living. It creates the space to listen. It creates space to pray. It creates space to remain. And in a world that is constantly pushing us forward, in a world that is moving at an unsustainable pace, we feel it. Choosing to slow down for love is one of the most radical acts of discipleship that you can make in your life. And this brings us all the way back to Deuteronomy chapter 6. See, Moses begins Deuteronomy chapter 6 with, "Hear, O Israel." That Moses begins Deuteronomy chapter 6, and he says, before I give you anything to do, there is something for you to receive. Listen up, Israel. Pay attention, Israel. Remember, Israel. The Shema is not first a command about obedience or behavior. It's an invitation into love. Love the Lord your God with everything that is within you. See, the gospel of Jesus isn't that we get this all right. The gospel is that Jesus is our life. That he's already done for you and for me what we could never do on our own. And now by grace, by his mercy, he invites us into a way of living with him. That a rule of life is not a way to earn God's favor. A rule of life is not a way to earn God's love. It's simply a response to it. It's how we say yes to the life that Jesus has already offered to us. And if you've never done that before, like, can I just encourage you, take your phone, tap that logo in front of you, click the word Jesus. Like, there's no greater decision in your entire life than to walking with him. And so if you've never done that, I just want to encourage you. We'd love to have that conversation with you. So as I wrap this up, before we go to communion, I just want to pray. I want to pray that we're able to take this entire sermon series that's been so beneficial for so many people, and that we'd actually be able to make it practical in our lives. That this wouldn't just be a flash in the pan, but something that actually integrates into the lives that we live. And so would you bow with me as I pray? Father, we come before you. And Lord, admittedly, we are a people just like the Israelites that so often forget. Our memories fade, our life gets distracted, and pretty soon, it's not that we're facing unbelief. It's just that we're settling for a faith that is so much less than what you've offered. And so, Lord, I thank you for the words of Deuteronomy chapter 6, the invitation to come and to love you, the structure that you gave to the Israelites for them to create their own trellis, their own structure that would help support the life that you were calling them to live. And I thank you for the saints of old who took that out of Deuteronomy chapter 6 and created a simple tool of a rule of life that can help us organize our life in such a way that we are walking with you, that we're learning to love, that we're learning to receive your love. And so, Lord, as we walk through this, I pray that you would give us the courage and the clarity to put something like this together, to pay attention. And Lord, as many people are in this room, Lord, every one of these is going to look different, that you have wonderfully and uniquely made each and every one of us. And so, Lord, I pray that you would help us find what it is that you're calling us to. Lord, we give all of this to you. It's in your Son's name that I pray. Amen.